My name is Maya. I'm 27 years old. I've always lived in Charleston, where names, titles, and appearances rule everything. My parents, Catherine and Daniel, built their world on image. I was the wrong daughter for it. My younger sister, Isla, fit their dreams perfectly, beautiful, charming, shallow. I never cared for appearances. I loved creating things with my hands. That's why I became a ceramic artist. Every time I shaped clay, it felt like breathing. My parents never hid their disappointment. They never missed a chance to remind me that Isla was the success story. I accepted it, thinking some love was better than none. Then Evan came into my life. The sink in my small apartment broke, so I called a local repair shop. Evan showed up the next morning, strong hands, kind eyes, easy smile. He was different. He fixed the sink, then stayed to talk. 1 hour turned into 2. 2 hours turned into coffee. In Evan, I found what I had never known. Someone who listened without judgment. Someone who looked at me and saw more than failure. We fell in love without grand gestures, just small, honest moments stitched together. When Evan proposed, I said yes without hesitation. For the first time, I was choosing my own happiness. I wanted a small wedding. Quiet. Honest. We booked a modest venue called the Hazel Fern Inn, tucked away on a calm street surrounded by trees. No show, no shine, just love. Evan and I planned every detail ourselves. We chose simple rings. I made the centerpieces from hand-painted ceramic bowls. He helped tie ribbons to the chairs. It was perfect. A week before the wedding, Catherine called. Her voice sounded soft, almost kind. "We want to be there," she said. "To support you." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that maybe, just once, they were choosing me. I said yes. They arrived early on the wedding day. Isla wore diamonds. Daniel shook Evan's hand like it was a test. Catherine smiled too much. Still, I hoped. The ceremony was set for 4. Guests began to arrive. Evan was helping the coordinator with seating. I was in a back room, fixing my dress, when Catherine stormed in. She was holding her wrist. "My bracelet's missing," she snapped. "The Bulgari one. $22,000. I blinked. "What?" She didn't explain. She turned and left. Moments later, Isla burst in, looking panicked. "They're saying Evan took it." I froze. "Daniel says he found it in Evan's bag." I couldn't move. My throat closed. But deep down, I knew it was a lie. I left the room, walked through the hall, and stepped outside. Guests stood still. Catherine was crying. Daniel held the bracelet in his hand. Evan stood nearby, quiet, eyes full of disbelief. "He stole from us," Catherine said. "Before the wedding." "What does that say about him?" I stepped beside Evan. "He didn't steal anything," I said. "He's using you," Isla added. "He's nothing." My heart pounded. "You're lying." Catherine's face twisted. "You ungrateful child." Then, in one violent motion, she grabbed one of the ceramic vases I had made, the ones I shaped with my own hands, and threw it at me. It struck my head. I fell. Pain burst through my skull. The room spun. Blood ran down my face. Someone screamed. Evan's hands were on me immediately. "Maya, stay with me," he said, his voice tight with fear. My head spun. Blood trickled down my face, but I couldn't focus. "I'm fine," I whispered, barely able to speak. "No, you're not," Evan insisted, lifting me gently. "We need a doctor." Now. He moved me outside, but I felt like I was drifting away. The air felt harsh against my skin. The sirens came closer. Then 2 police officers arrived. "Call the ambulance," one officer said, looking at me. Evan stayed close, holding me steady as I sat on the curb. I could barely keep my eyes open. The officers approached my family. Catherine stood at the door, still shocked, while Isla hovered nearby. The officer asked them to step aside. I turned my head to Evan. "It's a lie. They're lying." He squeezed my hand, his expression hard. "We'll fix this." The officers questioned Catherine and Daniel. Evan stood up, his voice cold. "I'm Evan Harris. I'm pressing charges for assault and defamation," he said, handing the officer a business card. The officer glanced at it. "Harris?" he asked. "Yes, they planted the bracelet on me." The officer nodded. "We'll handle it, Mr. Harris." Evan knelt beside me again. "Don't worry. This will end." My head still ached, but knowing Evan was there, I felt a little relief. We weren't alone in this. The sound of the police questioning my family faded into the background as I tried to steady my breath. The dizziness kept creeping back, but I didn't want to close my eyes. I needed to stay awake, stay present. Evan sat beside me, his hand never leaving mine. He had a calmness about him, but I could see the tension in his jaw. His anger was barely contained, and I knew it wasn't just about what had happened to me. It was about what had happened to him, too. I couldn't believe they had accused him of stealing. Of all people, Evan wasn't capable of something like that. I glanced at the officers still questioning my family and saw Catherine's face twisted in defiance as she tried to defend herself. But it was no use. I could see in the officers' expressions that they weren't buying her story. Evan didn't say anything at first. He simply stayed by my side, holding my hand and reassuring me with soft words that felt like a lifeline. "I know this is hard, Maya," he said after a long silence. "But we'll make sure they don't get away with this." I nodded, though the weight of the situation hung heavy on me. The bracelet had been planted on him, and they'd made it look like he was the thief. But what worried me most was the fact that my mother had resorted to violence to defend her false accusations. It made me question everything I had ever believed about her. The ambulance finally arrived, and the paramedics rushed to assess my injury. The sharp pain in my head pulsed with each movement, but I barely registered it as they bandaged my forehead. My thoughts were more focused on what had just happened, on what was still unfolding. Evan stayed close as I was helped into the ambulance, his presence a steady force. I felt a strange sense of calm in his touch, as if everything would be okay as long as he was there. The ride to the hospital was a blur, but the harsh lights and the sterile scent of the emergency room brought me back to reality. The doctors were quick, assessing the injury to my head and making sure there were no serious internal issues. It felt like hours, but I knew it had only been a few minutes. Eventually, I was settled into a room, and Evan was right by my side. The doctors had given me something for the pain, but my thoughts were still swirling. "I'm so sorry, Maya," Evan said quietly, his eyes filled with regret. "This shouldn't have happened." I shook my head slightly, trying to clear the haze from my mind. "It's not your fault. None of this is." Evan leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "I know, but I can't help feeling responsible." "You didn't do anything wrong," I said firmly. "This is on them, not you." A brief silence followed before I added, "I just don't understand why Mom would do something like this. Why she'd go that far." Evan's eyes softened. "People like your mother, they think they can control everything. They want to protect their image at all costs. But you have to know, Maya, this isn't your fault." I turned to him, trying to focus on his words even as my head throbbed. "I feel like I've been living in a lie." "You're not alone in this," Evan said, squeezing my hand. "We'll figure this out together." And just like that, I knew I wasn't fighting this battle alone. Evan would be with me, no matter how hard it got. Catherine didn't respond. She simply stood there, her expression unreadable, as I turned my attention back to Evan, trying to pull myself together. "I need space, Catherine," I said, my voice firm now. "Please leave." She hesitated for a moment before nodding and quietly stepping out of the room, leaving us alone again. As the door closed behind her, I exhaled deeply, feeling a weight lift off my chest. The confrontation had drained me, but it was necessary. Now we could focus on the next step, making sure that the truth came out, no matter how difficult it was. "Thank you," I whispered to Evan, my voice hoarse. He squeezed my hand gently. "I'll always be here for you, Maya. Always." And in that moment, despite the pain, despite the chaos, I felt like maybe, just maybe, everything would eventually be okay. The next morning, sunlight filtered weakly through the hospital curtains as I sat up in bed, feeling the dull throb in my head. Evan was there, as he had been all night, curled uncomfortably in a chair. When I shifted, he woke up instantly, his eyes alert. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I'm fine," I whispered, though the truth was more complicated. There was a long road ahead, but I wasn't alone anymore. "Can we leave soon?" I already spoke with the nurse. "You're being discharged in an hour," Evan said, smiling gently. I nodded, relieved. I didn't want to spend another second in that sterile room. As we prepared to leave, the doctor entered, gave a final check, and signed the discharge papers. I changed slowly, each movement careful, and Evan helped without making me feel small. He treated me like I was strong, even when I didn't feel it. We stepped out of the hospital into the cool morning. Evan had already arranged a ride for us. We weren't going back to the house. I had no intention of returning to the place where my trust had been shattered. Instead, Evan had booked a small suite at a modest hotel across town. It wasn't fancy, but it was peaceful, exactly what I needed. Once inside the hotel room, I sat on the edge of the bed, taking in the unfamiliar but comforting surroundings. Evan placed our small bags down and sat beside me. "What now?" I asked quietly. He thought for a moment before answering. "We clear your name. We make sure everyone knows you didn't do anything wrong. And after that, we build a new life, just the two of us." A lump formed in my throat. "I don't want to go back to that life." "You won't have to," Evan promised. "You're free now, Maya. It's their burden to carry, not yours." I leaned my head against his shoulder, feeling the first true spark of hope I had felt in days. For the next few hours, we made calls. Evan contacted a lawyer to advise us on how to handle the false accusations. I called a few trusted friends, explaining the truth. Each call was exhausting, but necessary. Each one a step toward taking back control. By evening, Evan brought in dinner, simple food from a diner down the street. We ate quietly, too tired to talk much. Afterward, I sat by the window, watching the quiet street below. The life I had known was over. The family I had fought so hard to keep happy had broken my heart. But sitting here, with Evan by my side, I realized something important. Sometimes losing everything you thought you needed was the only way to find what you truly deserved. Evan came up behind me, wrapping his arms gently around my shoulders. "We'll be okay," he said softly. I believed him. Whatever came next, we would face it together. Over the next week, Evan and I settled into a quiet routine at the hotel. He worked remotely on a few business projects while I focused on healing, not just the injury on my head, but the deeper wounds no one could see. Our lawyer moved quickly. He gathered evidence proving both my innocence and Evan's true background. It wasn't difficult. There were hotel security cameras, guests who had witnessed my mother confronting me, and undeniable proof that the bracelet accusation was false. The revelation of Evan's real identity also shook those who had once judged him so harshly. Within days, my mother's actions became public knowledge. She faced charges for assault and making false accusations. Her precious social circle, once the center of her pride, turned its back on her. My sister, who had supported her lies, was exposed as well. Meanwhile, Evan and I stayed far from the chaos. We built a new space for ourselves, one where no one else's judgment could reach us. One evening, as we sat on the small balcony of our hotel room, Evan reached for my hand. "Maya," he said, his voice steady, "I want us to leave this city. Start fresh somewhere else. A place where no one knows us, a place we choose for ourselves." The thought of leaving everything behind was terrifying and freeing. "Where would we go?" I asked. "I have a few ideas," he said, smiling. "Somewhere warm. Somewhere peaceful. We could open a small business. Something simple. Something that's ours." For the first time in months, I allowed myself to dream, not dreams tied to anyone else's expectations, but dreams that were truly mine. "I'd like that," I whispered. Evan squeezed my hand. Then it settled. That night we made plans. Quiet plans, just between us. Plans for a life built on trust, respect, and love, not appearances or wealth. And for the first time in my life, I realized happiness wasn't about what you had, it was about who stood with you when everything else fell away. 2 weeks later, Evan and I left the city behind. We moved to a small town on the coast, where the air smelled like salt and no one knew our names. Evan bought a cozy storefront near the water, and we turned it into a bookstore and cafe. I had always loved books, not just reading them, but sharing them. Now, I got to spend each day surrounded by stories, sipping coffee, and greeting strangers who quickly became familiar faces. We lived in a small apartment above the shop. It wasn't luxurious, but it was ours. Every detail, from the soft rug in the living room to the mismatched mugs in the kitchen, reflected who we were becoming. Evan handled the business side while I focused on the customers. I learned to bake, even though I burned the first few trays, and Evan always ate them anyway, smiling like they were perfect. In quiet moments, we talked about everything, our fears, our hopes, our pasts. Evan shared stories from his childhood, of the loneliness that came from being raised with expectations instead of love. I told him how invisible I always felt at home, how I spent years trying to be enough. We both knew the pain of being misunderstood. But here, with each other, we were truly seen. Sometimes, I still thought about my mother and my sister, the family I had left behind. I didn't hate them. I simply felt distant. Like they were part of a book I had closed. One afternoon, a letter arrived. It was from my sister, a few short paragraphs. No apology, just an update. My mother had been sentenced to community service and ordered to attend therapy. My sister was trying to mend their relationship. They wished me well. I didn't reply. Some things are better left unanswered. Instead, I folded the letter and tucked it into a drawer, then returned to the front of the shop, where Evan was wiping down the counter and laughing with a customer. He looked up and smiled at me, and in that moment, I knew I had everything I needed. Not the past, not the approval I once begged for, but a present I had chosen, a future I trusted, and love that asked for nothing but the truth.